Good morning. I'm Don Dickey, a member of this congregation, and it's a privilege to welcome you here on a day when we don't have a fresh 8 inches of snow on the ground. We have our music director, Anthony Edwards, who was not able to make it today, and we again welcome to our piano Daniel Doss, who does a very fine job, and we're always blessed to see the talent in the larger congregation. This is the time we set aside to welcome guests and visitors. Do we have any members who have brought a visitor today? If so, would you please stand? Let us know their name and where they're from. Are there any visitors who are here today who would be comfortable standing? Let us know your name and where you're from. We'd love to hear from you. Yes, sir. The Little Apple, welcome. Glad you could make it here on a wintry day. Yes?
I'm Katie Edward, and I'm with Direction Committee, so...
Good to have you here. Couple things in your order of service are announcements on our calendar. Couple things. One, the Valentine Bake Day sale by the Demeters will not be held today. And also the men's group will not be meeting on Thursday. And thank you all for attending.
Now is the time the time to call on the memories of the ancestors who thought they could not walk another step toward freedom, and yet they did. It is that time and place to call on the memories of the ancestors who, when the darkness of their lives threatened to take away the hope and the light, they reached a little deeper and prayed yet another prayer. It is that time and place to remember those who came through the long night to witness another sunrise. It is that time and place to remember the oceans of tears shed to deliver us to this time, to remember the bent knees and the bowed backs, to remember the fervent voices asking, begging, and beseeching for loved ones sold off. Time to remember their laughter and their joy, though they had far less and little reason for optimism, and yet they stayed on the path toward a better day. Time to hold to the steadfast hands and hearts and prayers of the ancestors that have brought us this far. Time to make them proud and show them and ourselves what we are made of. Time to show them that their prayers and sacrifices and lives were not in vain and did not go unnoticed, nor have they been forgotten. Did you not know that this day would come? Did you not know that we would have to change places? Did you not know that just as our ancestors were delivered, that you would also be delivered? Have you not seen the greatness and the power of the creative energy in the universe some call God, that moves and has its being through human agency? Have you not seen God in your neighbors' faces, in the homeless, in the battered woman, the trafficked child, the undocumented worker, the dispossessed? It is that time and place to know that it is our turn, that we must leave a legacy for our children and all the children. It is that time and that place. We are the ones we have been waiting for. For that, let us be eternally grateful. Amen, and blessed be. Those are the words of Kiyama Raman to bring us into this time of remembering, of dreaming, of finding ourselves in the river of history. What meanings can we take from our ancestors' actions? What meanings will our descendants make of our actions? This morning we will explore these questions together. But we will begin our worship with the lighting of this chalice. This chalice lighting ritual connects us through space with all the Unitarian Universalists who are gathering this morning. And it connects us through time to those who have come before on this liberal religious journey and all of those who will follow.
Good morning. My name is Parker, and I light this chalice for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
And now will you join me in affirming our covenant, which you'll see on the screen. Goodwill is the spirit of this church. And service is the law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to sing the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. And as you are risen, as you are comfortable, we will sing together song number 113, Where is Our Holy Church? Where is our holy church? this morning we're going to have a moment of connection. It's a time when you're invited to get up and move around and chat just for a short time with the people around you about a question that I'll pose. So the question today is about something you may have heard about when All Souls opened its doors about 10 days ago to serve as a warming center for people who might not have another place to go. So what I would like you to chat about is just to share with one another how you heard about this effort, whether you were involved in any way, and what implications you think that action might have. What spiritual implications, what implications for future planning. Just what are you thinking about it? So you can chat a little bit, and if you'll listen for the piano, Daniel will play a little bit to bring us out of that chatting time. It's a juicy topic, I know. Thank you. And now we will sing the children on their way to their classes.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming out on such a relatively treacherous day after a relatively treacherous week. I would venture that for the vast majority of our lives, when we experienced church in whatever form we did, we could easily see ourselves reflected in that church's narrative, and its heroes, its history, its leadership. Our membership, participation, and potential leadership in those churches was never questioned or suspect. For others, however, the same cannot be said. Reflections of themselves are not to be found in their religious institutions' stories. They are not reflected in the history, heroes, leaders of their spiritual homes. This is not a phenomenon from which the Unitarian Universalist movement is immune. Within the UUA, the historical erasure of Black and brown voices and invalidation of experience is a fact. Amid the movement for Black lives has grown a movement for Black lives within the UUA. Black Lives of UU works to provide information, resources, and support for Black Unitarian Universalists, and works to expand the role and visibility of Black UUs within our faith. We have a lot of overdue work to do to ensure that all UUs can recognize themselves reflected in our collective narrative, in our heroes, in our history, and in our leadership. Blue is there to ensure our accountability to that imperative. It is an imperative that we correct our story, past, present, and write together the story of our future. Today's collection will go to Black Lives of UU, and with that, the offering will be given and gratefully received. Thank you.
Please join me in the dedication of the offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation. Respectful, caring community to inspire personal and spiritual growth and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
Hard choices seem to be occasions for agonizing, hand-wringing, and gnashing of teeth. But I think we've misunderstood hard choices and the role they play in our lives. Understanding hard choices uncovers a hidden power each of us possesses. What makes a choice hard is the way the alternatives relate. In any easy choice, one alternative is better than the other. In a hard choice, neither is better than the other overall. You agonize over whether to stay in your current job in the city or uproot your life for more challenging work in the country, because staying is better in some ways and moving is better in others, and neither is better than the other overall. So how are we supposed to choose? Something seems to have gone wrong here. Maybe the choice itself is problematic and comparison is impossible. But they can't be right. It's not like we're trying to choose between two things that can't be compared. We're weighing the merits of two jobs, after all, not the merits of the number 9 and a plate of fried eggs. A comparison of the overall merits of two jobs is something we can make, and one we can often do make. I think the puzzle arises because of an unreflective assumption we make about values. We unwittingly assume that values like justice, beauty, kindness are akin to scientific qualities like length, mass, and weight. Take any comparative question not involving values, such as which of two suitcases is heavier. There are only 3 possibilities. The weight of one is greater, lesser, or equal to the weight of the other. Properties like weight can be represented by real numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on. And there are only 3 possible comparisons between any 2 real numbers. One is greater, lesser, or equal to the other. Not so with values. As post-Enlightenment creatures, we tend to assume that scientific thinking holds the key to everything of importance to our world. But the world of values is different from the world of science. We shouldn't assume that the world of is, of lengths and weights, has the same structure as the world of ought, of what we should do. So if what matters to us, a child's delight, the love you have for your partner, can't be represented by real numbers, then there's no reason to believe that in choice there are only 3 possibilities, that one alternative is better, worse, or equal to the other. We need to introduce a new 4th relation beyond being better, worse, or equal that describes what's going on in hard choices. Understanding hard choices in this way uncovers something about ourselves we didn't know. Each of us has the power to create reasons. When alternatives are on a par, the reasons given to us, the ones that determine whether we're making a mistake, are silent as to what to do. It's here in the space of hard choices that you get to exercise the power to create reasons for yourself, to make yourself into the kind of person for whom country living is preferable to the urban life. When we choose between options that are on a par, we can do something really rather remarkable. We can put our very selves behind an option. Here's where I stand. Here's who I am. I'm for banking. I'm for chocolate donuts. This response in hard choices is a rational response, but is not dictated by reasons given to us. Rather, it's supported by reasons created by us. When we create reasons for ourselves to become this kind of person rather than that, we wholeheartedly become the people that we are. You might say we become the authors of our own lives.
Have you ever had to make a hard choice? I know I have. The TED Talk that Chuck read excerpts from describes these hard choices in which one alternative seems to be about the same as the other alternative, and yet you have to make a choice. For me, the hard choice that stands out most was when my husband and I were preparing to buy a house. And this was about 20 years ago, and we had small children at home. So there were some things that we wanted for sure in a house to fit our growing family. And because this was an unimaginably expensive decision, it felt very, very hard to make. So what we wanted were the right number of bedrooms and bathrooms. We would like to have a basement because we lived in Tornado Alley, a yard where the kids could play outside safely, a location close enough to an elementary school where the kids could walk. So we looked and we looked and we looked, and we ended up with 2 houses that on paper looked to be the same price range. They met all of those measurable criteria, the right number of bedrooms, the right number of bathrooms. They had a backyard, they had a basement. They were close to an elementary school. Now we had to choose between the 2 of them. And this is when it got complicated. Because the things that were different about the houses added values that really could not be directly compared. For example, one was newer and one was older. The newer house would probably need less work. The older house had character. The newer house was bigger, and it was on a cul-de-sac, which seemed like heaven with little kids, a place they could play. But the backyard was small and definitely unlovely. The older one was on a busy street, but inside there was beautiful wood and this stained glass window, and all you could see out the back were trees. Making a pro and con list for this choice was an exercise in futility, not that we didn't try. There's no way to objectively compare the value of living on a cul-de-sac and the value of seeing trees out your back windows. What it came down to, as Susan Chang describes in her TED Talk, was the value and the meaning that we made out of our choices. We decided to become, and so we became, people who value looking at trees over living on a cul-de-sac. We became people who appreciate old houses over the relative lack of maintenance that a newer house might need. And now as I look forward, assuming that I'm called to a church once I'm finished with school, we're looking forward to this choice again, and I think we'll still be those kinds of people who value looking at trees over living on a cul-de-sac. Our hard choices make us who we are, as Susan Chang says, on a very literal level. If we choose to live in a certain house in a certain neighborhood, we'll have different experiences than if we had chosen a house somewhere else. But our choices also make us who we are when we find and we share the meanings in those choices. This fall, I took a class on Unitarian, Universalist, and Unitarian Universalist history. As part of the project for this class, I spent a lot of time with the book that was lovingly prepared for this congregation about its history for its 150th anniversary. Thank you to whoever put that together. When I was at school last month, I also spent time in the archives that are held at Meadville Lombard. The archives there have correspondence between the American Unitarian Association and this congregation, also between the Unitarian Universalist Association and this congregation. It was fascinating to see the history as laid out in the book prepared for this congregation, alongside the correspondence that sort of told the backstory for all those things that were happening in the history. This congregation, begun by abolitionists in 1867, has certainly had its ups and downs and had its share of those hard choices. And again, the people in this community have chosen to continue. This was sometimes despite the empirical evidence staring them in the face. This congregation has experienced financial meltdowns, fire, threats from outside for its socially progressive positions, ministers who have resigned and taken half the congregation with them, conflicts within the congregation itself. There were times when there were very few congregants left to make the decision about whether to continue or to just close the doors. And still, carry on they did, even though one time it took a couple who moved here from elsewhere to encourage them to do so. And even though the pro and con list they might have made would have said, just give it up, those who came before us in this congregation made the decision to carry on. And from those decisions, we are here. About 10 days ago, All Souls made a choice that, depending on your perspective, was valiant or naive, or naively valiant, or valiantly naive. On January 29th, when the temperature here in Kansas City was forecast to dip well below zero with wind chills even colder, an email to downtown churches went out asking if any of them would be able to open their doors to provide warmth. The area shelters anticipated that they would not have space for all the people who would need shelter at that time. After a little discussion, some emails, and some phone calls, the leadership of this congregation said yes. Now, this church and the members are not trained, especially to provide services for people who are experiencing homelessness. Some of them are, but the majority not. The insurance policy is probably not written to cover offering overnight accommodations. If you made a list of the possible risks for All Souls to open as a warming center and the possible benefits, you might be able to find more reasons to not do it. And if All Souls was an organization that served a financial bottom line, these doors would certainly have stayed shut. But All Souls is not beholden to shareholders in the same way, and not beholden to make a profit. It's an organization that serves and is fueled by its mission and its values, and weighing the value of human life over possible risks is an easier choice for us than those organizations driven by profit. Now, as you may have noticed in the moment of connection, this has sparked a lot of conversation. Last week, people who spent time here offering the warming center met to debrief their experiences. At that meeting, some volunteers stepped up to say, I'm interested in continuing this talk, to figure out what is it that we would need to do and to have in place if All Souls is to open its doors in that way again. After the meeting, I spoke with Kendall about the warming center conversation. As part of my internship here at All Souls, one of my assignments is to create a focused initiative to practice my leadership here among you. The exploration of what might need to happen if All Souls were to choose to do this again dovetails nicely with what my coursework is asking me to do. So I decided to take it on with Kendall's permission and with cooperation from the people who volunteered to continue the conversation. My task, our task, will not be to make any decisions, but just to facilitate the conversation. The question we'll be exploring is this: if All Souls would like to serve as an emergency shelter for warming, or for cooling for that matter, what types of preparation would need to be made? What sort of training might volunteers need? What collaborations with other agencies might need to be explored or developed or deepened? What policies and procedures would need to be created? And beyond these practical nuts and bolts of how this might happen, we'll also explore the spiritual implications. How might we be challenged by offering hospitality in our building? How might we grow? What might we learn that will influence our behavior in the world? What meaning will we attach to this action and to how we answer these questions? What if we decide not to pursue this? What does that mean about our congregation? So this challenge, this question about if we would want to do this, is not the only challenge that All Souls is facing this winter. As you saw in the slides and as you probably received in a letter this week, you now have learned that All Souls has a significant budget shortfall this year. The letter included questions about what the ramifications might be of not meeting the budget. A logical place to start is in the biggest budget line item, which is staffing. But reducing hours for staff has consequences not only for those people themselves, but also for the congregation and its capacity to fulfill its mission. This is a crucial time of self-reflection. What do we want this church to be? What programs are important to each of us? What is it that we want to be for, as Susan Chang said? And what can we put our agency behind? How we respond will be another of those choices that will determine the next page of the history of this congregation. But this picture is not just limited to All Souls. As you may be aware, our denomination and indeed all religious organizations are facing challenges. In another of my classes this January, we explored the idea that we are entering a post-denominational age. As you may be aware, the number of people in religious communities is declining. The Pew Research Center has some great information if you want to look it up. But the bottom line is that churches are closing for lack of people and resources. Unitarian Universalism is holding its own for now. But even in a time when we have a message that seems more relevant than ever, it is not growing. Religious communities are grappling with changes in our culture, including the impact of digital media, changes in family structure, increasing number of people who identify as spiritual but not religious, increasing numbers of people who do not have any religious affiliation, decreasing participation among people who do belong to churches, and others. This way that we've been doing church doesn't seem to fit in our postmodern, individualized society. And yet, because this is a story about on one hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, and yet, people long to be connected. We want to have a place to think about what's most important to us. We want to make meaning out of our lives. We need to know that there's someone out there who cares. In class, we explored new kinds of spiritual and religious communities that are being created now. Some are programs of established churches, and others are springing up on their own. Choosing to meet this challenge will require courage and agility. How our denomination responds to these very real pressures will determine if we continue to exist down the road. Our histories, individual, congregational, denominational, are a result of the choices we make. As I consider my own personal choices, I sometimes think of what the impact of them might be on the generations that follow. I'm reminded of the quote from Jonas Salk, the creator of the vaccine for polio, who said, "Our greatest responsibility is to be good ancestors." Often when we think of our ancestors, we think of those people to whom we owe gratitude for sacrificing so that we could have things a little bit better, so things would be a little easier for us. But that model doesn't always work anymore. It's based on an infinite amount of resources, and we are learning that our resources are not infinite. Things are not necessarily getting better for our children and our grandchildren, at least in terms of this physical world. The dark underbelly of capitalism is becoming more apparent as the United States' economy is not improving, at least not for the 99%. In the past, we could tell our children, just get a college degree and things will guaranteed be better. That's not always true anymore. A degree may be helpful, but it's no longer a guarantee. So in the face of these admittedly depressing facts, What does it mean in our time to be a good ancestor? As Kiyama Raman wrote in the opening words that I used, it is that time and that place to know that it is our turn, that we must leave a legacy for our children and all the children. I believe, and I ask you to consider, that our ancestral task is to grapple with these very questions, to grapple with our values. And following our values, we must make hard choices and find the meaning in what we choose. Our legacy, then, is passing on those meanings and those stories to future generations. For example, we consider the decision to open All Souls as a warming center. We can look for the meaning of that choice. Was it the work of some people who naively risked too much? Or was it a valiant effort to save people from freezing to death? Or was it both? The meaning we make from that is what forms us, what forms our story, and what we can pass on to our descendants. Here together in religious community, we can grapple with all the hard choices we face. Here we can find resources to help us make meaning in our individual and our communal lives. Here we can learn and grow together, and maybe even create some change in the world. Making meaning is hard work, but it's also joyful work. And either way, it's the work of our human condition. The choir sang in the introit about a journey, like the journey that we're on. They sang, "Awake, arise, the journey's begun. We travel on together as one. We know not where the road will lead, but we move in faith, making love our creed. As we follow, the journey is our home. Good travelers walk with company, sharing bread with those in need, giving help along the way to those who fall, who wander astray. As we follow, the journey is our home. Join with us in Jubilee. Celebrate our family. Sing together joyfully. The earth moves with us as we go. Our cry is heard. Our pain is known. Yet far beyond the setting sun, there shines a light of victory won. The journey is our home. The journey is our home. It's not that we are headed to our home, but we are in it now. We are making our stories now. This perpetual journey of learning and growing is where we reside. It is our task as individuals and as a community to find the meaning in the journey as it takes us from our past to our future. I wish you courage and joy on your journey. Join me. May it be so. If you now you'll rise as you are comfortable, and we'll sing together, "Arise, all souls." The closing words come from our ancestor, the Reverend Raymond Bragg. Raymond Bragg, for whom this room is named, was minister here from 1952 to 1973, and this week marks the 40th anniversary of his death. He wrote, "May the hour we spend here in this place make us more understanding, more compassionate, stronger to resist evil and to do the good, to love truth even when it is disillusioning and painful, to discriminate between opinion and knowledge, to revere all goodness, whatever its setting, to be compassionate, to love life, to allow nature's pageantry of leaf and flower, of cloud and sunset, to weave their spell upon us, to keep the imagination of a child amid the experiences of maturity, to be a citizen of the universe and feel our kinship with all that lives or has lived, to be patient in the face of mysteries beyond human ken, to understand ourselves and others. That is our aspiration. We belong to the believers of the world, to those who through their faith have wrought righteousness. We belong to the doubters of the world, who have dared to question and criticize, to evaluate and seek truth for ourselves. We belong to the builders of the future. May we be faithful in our day and generation, our lives being lights to the world, our influence healthful, our characters an inspiration to right action, and our memories a blessing. Amen."